France's burqa ban. Women are effectively under house arrest. I'm going to tell you up front that I do not know how to pronounce a lot of these names. Hind Amas walks into a brasserie in the North Paris suburb of Aulnay-sous-Bois. Jaws drop, shoulders tighten, and a look of disgust ripples across the faces of haggard men sipping coffee at the bar. "Hang on, what's all this? Isn't that banned?" splutters the outraged waiter behind the bar, waving a wine bottle at her niqab. Ahmas stands firm, clutches her handbag with black-gloved hands, and says, "Call the police, then." But she decides there's no point fighting. We cross the road to a cafe where she's a regular. No one bats an eyelid. The boss certainly doesn't want to lose her customer. Ahmed is breaking, and I believe there may be a page that is missing here, so sorry, is breaking a law. So French, the burqa ban law. A French justice minister says fewer than 10 cases are currently going through the courts, and the lack of fines shows the state favors dialogue, not punishment. But Gilles de Vere, a lawyer acting for Ahmas and several other women in niqab, argued punishments were not being handed out because the niqab law contravenes European human rights legislation on personal liberties and freedom of religion. As soon as a fine is imposed, there will be an appeal right up to the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg, which could rule against the law and expose the French state as a laughingstock. If the French law is challenged in this way, the result would be crucial for Muslims across the continent. Belgium introduced its own niqab ban this summer, punishable not just by a fine, but 7 days in prison. In Italy, the far-right Northern League has resuscitated a 1975 law against face coverings to fine women in certain areas of the north. Silvio Berlusconi's party is now preparing an anti-niqab law. Denmark is preparing legislation to limit the wearing of niqabs. Politicians in Austria, the Netherlands, and Switzerland are pushing for outright bans. Thomas Hammarberg, the Council of Europe's Commissioner for Human Rights, blogged this summer, quote, "The way the dress of a small number of women has been portrayed as a key problem requiring urgent discussion and legislation is a sad capitulation to the prejudices of xenophobes." Ahmas grew up in and around Paris, where her father, born in Morocco, worked as a town hall gardener. Her parents were not strict Muslims. She put on the niqab 6 years ago as an educated single woman who once wore miniskirts and liked partying, but then rediscovered her faith. She says her now ex-husband had nothing to do with her choice. The new law punishes men who force women to wear the niqab with a 30,000 euro fine, but none has yet been imposed. Like many women in niqab who refuse to stay indoors, she is desperate for work. For years, she worked in call centers as a specialist in telephone polling. Even before the ban, she knew it would be easier to get work without the niqab. So at the office, she would always pull back her veil, leaving her face exposed for the day. "Life is hard and I have to work. If my daughter wants something, even a Barbie doll, and I can't pay for it, it breaks my heart." In January, at the height of the public debate on the niqab, Ahmas lost her job after her contract wasn't renewed. I've contacted scores of employers looking for work. I always ask them if they accept the veil. They say, "It depends on what type. If it's a tunic and trousers and a headscarf, that's okay, but a long robe is not." This is clear discrimination. totally illegal, she sighs. Secular France has a complicated relationship with the veil. In 2004, all religious symbols, including the headscarf, were banned in schools. Even among Sarkozy's opponents, there are very few feminist or socialist politicians who would defend the rights to wear niqab in a country where secularism is one of the few issues that still unites a fragmented left. Barely a handful of people came to Notre Dame Cathedral to protest against the law in April. On the Côte d'Azur, Stephanie, 31, still likes to go swimming in the sea off Nice wearing her niqab. But the former law student and convert to Islam tries to go when the beaches are quiet. The last time she went for a dip with her mother and 10-year-old daughter on a Sunday afternoon, a sunbather called the police. A group of officers arrived and hurried across the sand saying, "But madame, what are you doing?" I said, "I'm drying myself." They wrote in their notebooks, "Swimming in niqab." Stephanie, who prefers not to use her surname, was summoned by the local state prosecutor. She arrived at court and agreed to lift her veil so security guards could check her identity, but they refused to give her access until an exasperated prosecutor buzzed her in himself. The prosecutor, whom she described as, quote, very human, wanted to better understand why she had wore the niqab. She converted at 17 and put on the niqab several years later, long before meeting her husband. Her North African parents-in-law didn't like her wearing full veil, and the marriage ended. Her own parents converted to Islam a few years later, but don't believe a niqab is necessary. She told the prosecutor it was her choice and refused to stop wearing it. The prosecutor reminded her of the law and let her go with no sanction or punishment. He told the local paper, Nice Matin, that a woman in a veil was less dangerous than someone who had, quote, double or triple parked. Before the law, Stephanie would often be called names like Batman, Zorro, or Ninja in the street, often by pensioners. Now people favor swear words or sexual assaults. She wants to work with children, but despite having a degree in theology, she can't find a job. The first time Stephanie was stopped by police was for standing on a central Nice shopping street in May. A police officer illegally gave her an on-the-spot fine, which was later overturned. This summer, a bus driver refused to let her onto a bus with her daughter. Quote, "If I have a meeting, I'll always leave the house at 6:30 a.m. instead of 8:30 a.m. in case a bus won't take me and I have to wait 45 minutes for another one." Recently, after she had bought a cinema ticket for the latest Harry Potter film with her daughter, staff tried to stop her entering the screening. Eventually, the cinema decided not to call the police because they didn't want to feature in the local paper. The headquarters of the French Collective Against Islamophobia is in a small ground floor office in a cobbled street near Paris's Gare de l'Est. It doesn't promote the wearing of niqab, but gives legal advice. Quote, "It's not the police I'm afraid of. It's the personal attacks on women by people acting on their own initiative in the street," end quote, says Sami Deba, the association's head. The group's legal advisor says there has been an explosion in the number of physical attacks on women wearing the niqab. Many women say that their attackers were middle-aged or old people. In one recent case, a young French convert was assaulted at a zoo outside Paris while carrying her 13-month-old baby. Her child was traumatized by the zoo attack and is now being seen by a psychologist. These women blame themselves. They see a baby in that situation and think, it's my fault. Rachel Nikaz, who paid the fines of the two women prosecuted for wearing the niqab in Brussels last year, is photographed below. At a cafe on the left bank, Rachel Nikaz, a French property developer, explains why his association, Don't Touch My Constitution, was the only group to stage high-profile protests when the law came into force. He backed Ahmad's birthday cake stunt and has set up a, quote, 1 million euro fund to pay any fines over the niqab. His next and most radical protest action will be this Thursday when his association announces its plans to field a woman in niqab for president in 2012. Nikaz is personally opposed to the niqab and thinks it is fair to ban it in French state buildings. But he thinks outlawing it in all public places is, quote, a gross attack on personal freedoms and the French Constitution. The perverse effect of this law is that women in niqab are effectively under house arrest, he says. He plays a voicemail message left on his mobile by the mother of a French convert, thanking him for taking a stand and saying there are several converts in niqab in Grenoble now too afraid to leave the house. There are no reliable statistics on who wears the niqab in France and whether they have kept wearing it since the law. It is estimated that only a few hundred women wear it, mostly French citizens. Muslim associations say a minority of women have taken off the niqab or moved abroad. Nikaz says that more than 290 women still wearing niqab, have contacted him. He says a large number were divorced with children. Most were aged between 25 and 35. Many were French of North African parentage, and many were living on income support. An Open Society Foundation report on women in niqabs in France in April found that of a sample of 32 women in niqab, none had been forced to wear the full veil. Many said they would refuse to take it off after the law came in, adding that they would avoid leaving home or move abroad.